A team retires one noisy SIEM rule on Friday. Nobody notices that it was the only rule mapped to a credential access technique for one business unit. The heat map still looks green because it was exported last month. On Monday, the SOC is reviewing an incident and realizes the gap existed for 3 days. That is coverage drift, not a broken rule investigation, not a quarterly spreadsheet problem. The question is simple. Can your SIEM pipeline warn you the moment coverage goes backward? Automated SIEM coverage tracking is the practice of recalculating detection coverage every time detection content changes. In plain English, when a rule is added, changed, disabled, or removed, the pipeline checks what defensive behaviors are still covered. Most teams map rules to a framework like ATT&CK, then connect those mappings to required log sources and rule status. In NIST-style terms, this supports the detect function through continuous monitoring and measurement. The keyword is continuous. A coverage heat map is not a document you admire. It is a computed output from current rules, current logs, and current deployment state. Before automation, coverage tracking is usually a workshop. Analysts gather rules, map them to techniques, argue about confidence, build a heat map, and present it. That map is useful for about 5 minutes. Then a log source is renamed. A rule is disabled during tune-in. A parser change breaks a field. A cloud account stops sending events. The spreadsheet does not know. Calendar-based remapping always lags behind the thing that actually changed. The SOC ends up trusting yesterday's picture. Automated tracking solves that by turning coverage into a build result, like a test. If coverage drops, the change should not pass silently. The mechanics are straightforward. First, store detection rules as managed content with metadata, technique mapping, severity, owner, required data sources, and expected fields. Second, when a rule deploy runs, the pipeline pulls the current production baseline. Third, it calculates coverage before the change and after the change. Fourth, it compares the two results. If one technique loses its last active rule, or coverage confidence drops from high to low, the pipeline raises a coverage regression alert. Do the same for log sources. If an endpoint stream, identity stream, or network stream disappears, any coverage depending on it should drop automatically. The SIEM is the runtime. Here is a real-style SOC scenario. A team has 3 SIEM detections mapped to suspicious identity behavior. 2 depend on sign-in logs. 1 depends on admin audit logs. A deployment removes an older identity connector name from the configuration because it looks unused. The deploy pipeline runs its coverage job. It sees that 2 enabled rules still exist, but their required log source is no longer present in the inventory. The coverage score for that technique drops because rules without data are not real coverage. The pipeline opens a ticket, posts the diff, names the affected rules, and blocks promotion to production until an owner accepts or fixes it. The strength is speed. You find coverage regression at change time, not during an incident review. It also makes trade-offs visible. If a team retires a rule, they can see exactly what coverage they are giving up. But this does not prove a rule is good. It does not prove the alert has low noise. It does not replace testing with known good defensive test data. It also depends on metadata discipline. If mappings are vague, owners are missing, or data source names are inconsistent, the output will be weak. Automated coverage tracking rewards clean content management. It exposes messy rule libraries fast. This sits between SIEM engineering, detection engineering, and security governance. The SIEM runs the detections and stores the alerts. The rule deploy pipeline becomes the control point for coverage checks. UEBA can add another angle by showing behavior models or anomaly detections mapped to the same coverage framework, but keep the math honest. Do not count a vague anomaly as full coverage unless the SOC knows how to investigate it. Risk and compliance teams also benefit because they stop asking for static screenshots. They can get live evidence, current rules, current logs, current mappings, and the last coverage diff. Start with a small slice. Pick 10 techniques your organization cares about. For each SIEM rule covering them, add 4 fields: technique ID, required log source, rule owner, and enabled status. Put that in the same repository or content system used by your rule deploy process. Then write one coverage computation. Count active coverage only when the rule is enabled and the required log source is present. Next, run that computation before and after every deploy. Alert on any coverage loss. Do not wait for perfect scoring. A simple diff that says, "This change removes the last active rule for this technique," is already valuable. 3 beats to remember. First, manual remapping always trails reality. A heat map drawn by hand is stale as soon as rules, logs, or owners change. Second, compute ATT&CK coverage on every SIEM rule deploy, not on a calendar. Treat coverage like a pipeline test. Third, diff before and after each change. A retired rule or dropped log source should raise a coverage regression alert by itself. This pairs directly with the rule deploy pipeline from earlier episodes. If this helped, subscribe. New security tools decoded episode daily, plus the daily ranked CVE brief on this channel.